This 4-year-old beggar girl sees a millionaire about to be eaten by cougars. But she saw everything and does something that shocked everyone. Watch until the end. Comment what you thought of this story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas scrubland as 4-year-old Daisy crawled through the thorny bushes, her small, already calloused hands clutching her Grandpa Jed's old rifle. The girl had learned early that survival didn't wait for the right age. Ever since the old man had passed 2 months ago, she had hunted the small animals that guaranteed her daily meal. Her bare feet knew every stone on the path to the creek, where the berry bushes promised ripe fruit. Her stomach had been rumbling for hours, a reminder that the last piece of rabbit meat had been finished the day before. Daisy walked with the caution of one who had learned that the wilderness did not forgive carelessness, her large, dark eyes always alert to the sounds of the brush. It was when she reached the clearing near the stream that the scene before her made her blood run cold. A man in a dark suit lay unconscious on the rocks, his pale face a stark contrast to the fine fabric of his clothes. Surrounding him, 2 mountain lions moved in slow circles, their powerful muscles rippling under their tawny fur as they sniffed the inert prey. Daisy knew these cats. She had seen them before, always keeping a respectful distance. She knew they wouldn't attack a small child like her without reason, but the unconscious man was an opportunity they would not pass up. The girl's heart hammered when one of the cougars crouched low, its fangs glinting in the sun as it prepared for the final pounce. Without a second thought, Daisy raised the heavy rifle, aiming high. The first shot echoed through the brush like thunder, sending birds flying in a panic. The cougars were startled, but they didn't flee completely. The larger one snarled, baring its sharp teeth as it looked around for the source of the noise. The second shot came right after, louder than the first. This time the 2 cougars decided the risk wasn't worth it. With elegant movements, they vanished into the dense vegetation, leaving only the echo of their heavy paws on the dry leaves. Daisy ran to the man, tossing the rifle aside. He was breathing, but he was burning with fever. Dried blood stained his forehead, where a wound indicated he had hit his head when he fell. The girl looked around, weighing her options. He was too big for her to carry, but leaving him there was a death sentence for when the cougars returned. With the determination that life in the wilderness had forged in her small chest, Daisy grabbed the stranger's arms and began to pull. Every foot was a battle against her own limited weight and strength. The scorching sun turned the task into torture, but she didn't give up. Step by step, stopping to catch her breath, the girl dragged the man the nearly 200 yards that separated the creek from her small adobe shack. When she finally managed to pull him inside the small structure, Daisy was exhausted. Her hands were bleeding from the thorns she'd encountered along the way, and her torn little dress clung to her sweaty body. But there was no time to rest. The man needed care, and she was the only person for miles around. The girl fetched fresh water from the clay pot that Jed had left and began to clean the wound on the stranger's head. Her small hands worked carefully, removing the dirt and dried blood. He mumbled incomprehensible words in his fever, sometimes trying to move, but always slipping back into unconsciousness. For 3 days, Daisy cared for the stranger as if he were family. She dripped water onto his chapped lips, placed damp cloths on his hot forehead, and stayed awake through the nights, watching his ragged breathing. The girl had used her last food reserves to make a thin broth, which she tried to make him swallow spoonful by spoonful. On the morning of the 3rd day, as Daisy returned from the creek with more water, she found the man sitting up on the makeshift bed, looking around in confusion. His deep brown eyes landed on the dirty, thin girl who was carrying the clay pot with difficulty. You saved me?" he asked in a hoarse voice, still trying to understand where he was and what had happened. Daisy nodded shyly, placing the pot on the floor. "The cougars were about to get you. I fired to scare them off and brought you home." The man looked at the girl's small hands, noticing the makeshift bandages made from scraps of cloth. Then his eyes scanned the simple home, seeing the extreme poverty in which she lived. There was no furniture besides the bed he was lying on, and a rudimentary wood-burning stove. The dirt floor was carefully swept, but it couldn't hide the reality of an abandoned child fighting for survival alone. "What's your name?" he asked, feeling a strange emotion swell in his chest. "Daisy. Grandpa Jed always called me that. He took care of me, but he went away a long time ago." The man closed his eyes, processing the information. A 4-year-old child, living alone in the middle of the scrubland, had risked her own life to save a complete stranger. The courage and generosity of that small girl touched him in a way he couldn't explain. "My name is Arthur Vance, and I owe you my life, little one." He tried to stand, but he was still weak. "Where are your parents, Daisy?" The girl lowered her eyes, shuffling her bare feet in the dirt. "I don't know. Grandpa Jed said they went on a trip when I was real little, but they never came back." Arthur felt his heart clench. Here was a child who had lost everything, yet still found the strength to help others. A decision began to form in his mind, a certainty that grew with every second he spent watching that brave little girl. "Daisy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "would you like to come with me? I have a big house in the city with food and a room all your own." The girl's eyes shone with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Life had taught her to be cautious, but there was something in this man's voice that made her want to believe. What neither of them imagined was that Arthur's impulsive decision was about to set off a chain of events that would reveal secrets buried for years and change their lives forever. The trip back to Stone Creek was a culture shock for Daisy. Sitting on the leather seat of Arthur's car, her wide eyes took in every detail of the landscape that gradually changed from arid scrubland to a bustling town. Her small hands clutched a cloth bag where she kept her only belongings, the golden medallion she always wore around her neck, and a faded piece of fabric that Jed had said belonged to her mother. Arthur drove in silence, still processing the magnitude of his impulsive decision. At 30, he had built a bakery empire that spanned 3 cities in the region. He was known for his coldness in business and his ability to make rational decisions based solely on profit and efficiency. But something about that brave little girl had awakened a part of him he thought had died long ago. When they arrived at the mansion on the outskirts of Stone Creek, Daisy froze in front of the wrought iron gate. The 2-story house, painted white with blue trim, was larger than all the buildings she had ever seen combined. The manicured garden, with its colorful flowers and trimmed grass, looked like a dreamscape to a child who had spent months living in a 1-room adobe shack. "Is this where I'm going to live?" she asked, her small voice filled with disbelief. "If you want to, yes," Arthur replied, watching the girl's reaction. "That room up there on the 2nd floor can be yours." When they entered the house, Daisy walked slowly through the wide hallways, timidly touching the smooth walls and observing the polished furniture. Everything there shone with cleanliness, a stark contrast to the rustic simplicity she was used to. In the spacious kitchen, she stopped in front of the enormous refrigerator, not fully understanding what that white object humming softly was. Dorothy, the 60-year-old housekeeper who had cared for the house for 2 decades, appeared at the kitchen door and nearly dropped the tray she was carrying when she saw the dirty, ragged girl next to her employer. "Mr. Vance, what—" she began, but was cut off by a gesture from him. "Dorothy, this is Daisy. She'll be living with us from now on. Prepare the blue room and see if you can find some suitable clothes for her." The housekeeper looked from the child to her boss, trying to understand the situation. In all her years working for Arthur, she had never seen him show any interest in children. In fact, he had avoided any situation involving family or personal responsibilities since the traumatic episode 5 years ago. While Dorothy took Daisy for a bath and clean clothes, Arthur locked himself in his office, trying to organize his thoughts. Through the large windows, he watched the street traffic, but his mind was far away. The girl's presence stirred memories he had fought to bury, especially memories of Hope Taylor, the woman he had abandoned at the altar when he discovered her pregnancy. The phone rang, interrupting his reflections. It was Gerald, his partner in the bakeries, his voice tense. "Arthur, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about the Central Bakery. Hope has been asking strange questions about you, wanting to know where you've been the last few days. And there's something else. She seems different, like she's investigating something." Arthur's blood ran cold. Hope Taylor had been working as a supervisor at his largest bakery for 3 years, ever since she needed a job after losing everything during the years of depression that followed the abandonment. They maintained a strictly professional relationship, but Arthur always felt the weight of the past between them with every chance encounter in the company's hallways. "What kind of questions?" he asked, tension rising in his voice. "She wanted to know if you had family, if you had recently adopted a child." "Arthur, I know you two have history, but this seems like more than casual curiosity." When he hung up, Arthur realized that his decision to bring Daisy home would not go unnoticed. Stone Creek was a small enough town for news to spread quickly, especially about a single businessman who suddenly appeared with an adopted child. That afternoon, at the Central Bakery in the town's historic downtown, Hope Taylor was finishing her inventory check when she overheard 2 employees talking about the day's news. "They said the boss showed up today with a little girl, all dirty, from out in the country," mumbled Connie, one of the oldest counterclerks. "You think she's a relative?" speculated Mary Jo, arranging loaves of bread in the display case. Hope felt her heart race. At 32, she had learned to control her emotions, but the mention of a child in Arthur's life stirred complex feelings she preferred to keep dormant. 5 years ago, she had lost her own daughter, under circumstances she had never fully understood. The baby had been born premature, with complications that required a prolonged hospital stay. For weeks, Hope had divided her time between the hospital and desperate attempts to contact Arthur, who had disappeared after calling off the wedding. When she finally received the news that the child had passed away during the night, something inside her had died too. Now, hearing that Arthur had brought a little girl home awakened an old pain mixed with a morbid curiosity. Who was this child? Where had she come from? And why would a man who had fled his own fatherhood suddenly be interested in adopting an unknown girl? Hope finished her work in silence and decided she needed to see for herself. She knew Arthur's habits well, knew he usually stopped by the bakery every morning to check on business. The next day, she would be there to see if he showed up with this child. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Daisy had just taken her first bath with hot water and scented soap. Dorothy had found a simple dress that, although still too big, was a better fit than the rags the girl had been wearing. With her hair clean and combed, Daisy looked like a completely different child. During dinner, served at a huge table in the dining room, the girl ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a miracle. Arthur watched, fascinated by the way she expressed gratitude for every small act of kindness, as if she couldn't believe it was real. "Daisy," he said as she finished eating, "tomorrow I'm taking you to see where I work. It's a bakery where we make bread and pastries." The girl's eyes lit up. "Really? I'll get to see how they make the bread. You will, and maybe you'll meet some of the people who work with me. What Arthur didn't imagine was that this seemingly innocent visit would be the spark for revelations that would shake the carefully constructed foundations of his controlled life. Hope was waiting, and the encounter between the two would be just the beginning of a chain of events that would force them to confront truths buried for years. That night, Daisy slept for the first time in a soft bed with clean sheets and a fluffy pillow. But her dreams were disturbed by fragmented images of a house larger than Jed's, with people she couldn't clearly identify. They were memories that seemed to come from far away, from a time her young mind struggled to access. Across town, Hope also couldn't sleep, tormented by the prospect of seeing Arthur again and by the growing curiosity about the child who had changed his routine. An inexplicable intuition told her there was much more to this story than met the eye, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning brought a light fog that covered the streets of Stone Creek like a veil of mystery. Daisy woke before sunrise, still adjusting to the new environment. The silence of the large house contrasted sharply with the sounds of nature she was used to at Jed's place. She walked to the bedroom window and looked out at the well-kept garden, where small birds she didn't recognize sang among the flowers. Arthur found the girl sitting on the stairs when he came down for breakfast. She was wearing the same dress as the day before, but Dorothy had managed to tailor it during the night so it was less baggy. Her dark hair, now clean and shiny, framed a face that revealed traces of a beauty that would blossom with time. "Sleep well?" he asked, sitting beside her on the stairs. Daisy nodded, but there was a thoughtful look in her eyes. "I dreamed of a different house, big like this one, but with a yard that had a very tall tree with a little birdhouse hanging from it." Arthur felt an inexplicable shiver. The description seemed strangely familiar, but he couldn't place the memory. Must have been a beautiful dream. It was. There was a woman with long hair who rocked me, singing a sad song, but when I woke up I couldn't remember the melody. During breakfast, served in the spacious kitchen, Daisy showed a voracious curiosity for everything around her. She asked questions about every object, every new flavor, every different sound. Arthur realized that despite her young age and the hard life she had led, the girl possessed a keen intelligence and an impressive capacity for observation. "Today we're going to see my work," he announced when they finished eating. "You're going to see what a real bakery is like." The drive to the central bakery took only 15 minutes, but for Daisy, it was like a journey to another world. She watched, enchanted, the colonial-style houses of the historic downtown, the cars passing by, the people walking on the sidewalks. Everything was new, different, fascinating. The bakery occupied a renovated old building with large glass windows that allowed a view of the bustling interior. The aroma of fresh bread and newly baked pastries filled the street, drawing a constant line of customers from the early morning hours. Daisy took a deep breath, inhaling the delicious smell that made her stomach rumble even after a hearty breakfast. Hope had arrived at work earlier than usual that morning. She had spent a sleepless night, alternating between anxiety and determination. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her brown hair tied back in a low bun, maintaining the professional appearance she had cultivated during her 3 years working for Arthur. But her hands trembled slightly as she organized the papers on her desk, betraying the tension she felt. When she saw Arthur's car pull up in front of the bakery, her heart leapt. She positioned herself strategically behind the main counter, from where she could watch the entrance without being noticed immediately. What she saw when he got out of the vehicle left her breathless. Arthur opened the passenger door and helped a small girl get out. The child had dark hair and large, curious eyes that scanned everything around her with fascination. She wore a simple but clean dress and held Arthur's hand with the confidence of someone who had found safety after being lost for a long time. Hope felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. The girl looked to be between 4 and 5 years old, exactly the age her daughter would have been if she was still alive. There was something in the child's posture, in the way she tilted her head when she heard something interesting that awakened a deep pain in her chest. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," Mary Jo greeted as they entered the bakery. "And who is this princess?" "This is Daisy," Arthur replied, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "She'll be living with me from now on." Daisy smiled shyly at the employees, but her attention was soon captured by the display case full of golden loaves, colorful cakes, and pastries that looked like small works of art. Her eyes shone with a mixture of enchantment and restrained desire, as if she couldn't believe all that abundance was real. It was at that moment that Hope approached, walking slowly down the aisle that separated the office from the service area. Each step was calculated, each breath controlled, but internally she felt as if she were on the edge of a cliff. "Arthur," she said, her voice sounding steadier than she expected, "may I meet your, daughter?" The embarrassment was immediate and palpable. Arthur stiffened, clearly not expecting such a direct encounter. Daisy looked up at the woman who had spoken, studying her face with the natural curiosity of children. "Hope, this is Daisy. Daisy, this is Mrs. Hope, who has worked with me for a long time." "Hi," Daisy said simply, but she continued to watch Hope with a disconcerting intensity. Hope knelt to be at the girl's level, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow. Up close, she could see details that disturbed her even more. The exact color of the child's eyes, the shape of her nose, even the way she interlaced her fingers when she was nervous. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Daisy." "What a beautiful name," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Can you tell me where you came from?" "From the scrubland. I lived with Grandpa Jed in a little house near the creek," the girl answered naturally. "But he went away, and I was all alone. Then I saved Uncle Arthur from the cougars, and he brought me here." Hope felt a jolt run through her body. There was something deeply familiar in the girl's voice, in the cadence of her words, even in the way she gestured as she spoke. It was like looking into a mirror of the past, at echoes of memories she thought were buried forever. "Cougars?" Hope asked, trying to buy time to process her emotions. Daisy nodded proudly. "2 really big ones. I fired Grandpa Jed's rifle into the air and they ran off. Then I dragged Uncle Arthur home and took care of him until he got better." The extraordinary story of courage impressed all the employees present, but Hope could barely focus on the words. She was fixated on a detail that had caught her attention, a small golden chain around Daisy's neck, almost hidden by the dress's neckline. "What a pretty medallion you have," she commented, pointing discreetly. Daisy instinctively touched her neck, pulling the chain out. "Grandpa Jed said it was my mom's. He saved it for me since I was born." When the medallion became fully visible, Hope had to lean against the wall to keep from fainting. It was a small golden angel with delicate engravings on the wings and a small cross on its chest. It was identical, absolutely identical, to the medallion she had left with her daughter at the hospital before the child was taken to the neonatal ICU. Can I see it up close?" Hope asked, her voice a mere whisper. Daisy, unsuspecting, came closer and allowed Hope to examine the piece. On the back of the medallion there was an engraving that Hope knew by heart because she herself had had it made years ago. "To my daughter with eternal love, H.T." The initials of Hope Taylor. The world around her seemed to collapse. Hope stood up abruptly, her legs trembling, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Arthur immediately noticed her extreme pallor and approached, concerned. "Hope, are you all right? You're very pale." She looked at him, then at Daisy, and back at the medallion the girl had tucked back under her dress. 1,000 thoughts clashed in her mind, 1,000 impossible possibilities, 1,000 questions for which there were no logical answers. I need a glass of water," she murmured, stumbling towards the office. Arthur watched her go, an uneasy feeling growing in his chest. There was something about Hope's reaction that went far beyond a simple dizzy spell. The way she had examined Daisy, the intensity with which she had looked at the medallion, all of it set off an alarm in his mind. "Uncle Arthur," Daisy said, pulling on his sleeve, "did the lady get sad because of me?" "No, little one. She just wasn't feeling well," he replied, but his eyes remained fixed on the office door where Hope had disappeared. On the other side of the door, Hope leaned against the wall trying to breathe. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably as she tried to process the impossible. The child Arthur had adopted was wearing the medallion she had left with her dead daughter 5 years ago. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be chance. Something was terribly wrong, and she was determined to find out what, even if it meant digging up the most painful past of her life. The following week passed in a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries for everyone involved. Daisy adapted quickly to her new life, showing a thirst for learning that impressed even Dorothy. The girl spent hours in the house's library, flipping through picture books, and in a few days she could already recognize several words. Her intelligence was emerging remarkably, as if she were making up for lost time. Arthur watched this transformation with fascination. During the day, he took Daisy to see different parts of the city, introducing her as his adopted daughter. The girl was enchanted by each new experience. The park in the center of town, the farmer's market on Saturdays, even a simple trip to the doctor for a full checkup. Dr. Owens, Arthur's trusted pediatrician, confirmed that the child was surprisingly healthy, considering the precarious conditions she had lived in. But it was during this medical consultation that something disturbing came to light. When Dr. Owens asked about the girl's medical history, Daisy casually mentioned that she remembered being in a hospital when she was very little. "It smelled like medicine, and women in white took care of me," she said, concentrating to access fragmented memories. "I remember a lady who cried a lot and held my hand." Arthur and the doctor exchanged significant glances. 4-year-olds rarely retained such specific memories from when they were babies, unless the events had been particularly striking or traumatic. Meanwhile, Hope had begun her own investigation. During her free time, she searched old records at the hospital where she had lost her daughter, spoke discreetly with nurses who still worked there, and tried to reconstruct the events of those painful days 5 years ago. It was through Carmen, a nursing technician who had worked at the hospital since the 80s, that Hope got her first concrete lead. "I do remember that time," Carmen said when Hope sought her out at her home after work. "There was a lot of confusion in those days. Several babies in the neonatal ICU, some very young mothers, others abandoned. And that new nurse, what was her name again?" "What nurse?" Hope asked, her heart racing. "Clemence, that's right, Clemence Sanders. She worked the night shifts, a bit odd. Very reserved. Left the hospital suddenly without much explanation. It was around the same time you lost your little girl." The name Clemence echoed in Hope's mind like an alarm bell. She vaguely remembered this nurse, a young woman with dark hair who always seemed nervous when she was on duty. There had been something in her behavior that had aroused suspicion at the time, but Hope had been so consumed by the pain of her loss that she hadn't paid it any mind. "Carmen, do you remember anything else about this Clemence? Where did she go when she left the hospital?" The nursing tech thought for a moment. "I heard she went to the countryside to take care of a sick relative, but it was all very fast, very strange. One day she was there, the next she had disappeared." That same afternoon, Hope decided to take a more direct approach. She waited for Arthur to leave for a business meeting and went to his house, determined to talk to Daisy without interference. She knew she was crossing boundaries, but the need to find out the truth about that medallion was stronger than any social consideration. Dorothy answered the door with surprise. "Mrs. Taylor? Mr. Vance isn't home. Actually, I came to talk to Daisy, if possible. I've worked with Arthur for a long time, and I'd like to get to know the girl better." The housekeeper hesitated for a moment, but Hope's respectable reputation at the company won out. "She's in the garden. She's fascinated by the little birds." Hope found Daisy sitting under a leafy tree, drawing in a notebook Arthur had bought for her. The girl looked up as she approached, smiling with the genuine simplicity that characterized her. "Hi, Mrs. Hope. Want to see my drawings?" "Of course, sweetie," Hope said, sitting on the grass beside her. The drawings showed birds, trees, and surprisingly a small house with a tall person next to it. "Who is this person in the drawing?" "That's Grandpa Jed. He took care of me before he went away," Daisy explained. "He was very tall and had white hair. He always told me stories before bed." What kind of stories? Daisy thought for a moment. Stories about my mum. He said she was very beautiful and loved me very much, but she had to go away when I was a baby because she got very sick. "Oh, and he never told you your mother's name?" The girl shook her head. "He just said she was an angel and that one day, when I grew up, I would understand everything." Daisy paused, then added, "But sometimes I dream about her. She has hair like yours and she's always crying." Hope felt a shiver run down her spine. "How do you know it's your mother in the dreams?" "Because she sings the song Grandpa Jed used to sing to me, a sad song about little birds that fly far away but always come back home." The description made Hope's heart pound. It was the same lullaby she used to sing during her pregnancy, a melody her own mother had sung to her as a child, a song that few people knew, especially in that part of Texas. "Daisy," Hope said, choosing her words carefully, "do you remember anything from when you were very little, before you went to live with Grandpa Jed?" The girl frowned, concentrating. "Sometimes I have confusing dreams. I remember very bright lights, people in white, and a woman who cried a lot and said she loved me, but Grandpa Jed always said they were just silly dreams." "And this medallion you wear, did he tell you how he got it?" Daisy instinctively touched her neck. "He said my mom left it for me before she went away, that I should always keep it, because one day she would come back to get me." At that moment, Hope made a risky decision. "Can I see the medallion again?" "I promise, I'll give it back." The girl took the chain from her neck without hesitation and handed it to Hope. With trembling hands, she examined every detail of the golden piece. There was no doubt it was the exact same medallion she had had specially made for her daughter. Even a small scratch in the right corner, caused when she had dropped the piece on the hospital floor, was there. "Daisy," Hope said, her voice almost failing, "I need to ask you a very important question. Did Grandpa Jed ever mention a woman named Clemence, someone who worked at the hospital?" Daisy's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Her eyes widened, and she shrank back slightly, as if the name brought back unpleasant memories. "Clemence was the woman who used to visit Grandpa Jed sometimes," she said, her voice becoming small. "She was strange, always nervous. They fought a lot when she came over. One time I heard her yelling that she was scared, that someone might find something out. After that time, she never came back." "When was the last time she showed up?" "I think it was just before Grandpa Jed got sick and went away. She brought a suitcase and gave it to him, saying she had to disappear forever." Hope felt she was on the verge of discovering something monumental. "Do you know what was in the suitcase?" Daisy shook her head. "Grandpa Jed hid it in the cellar of the house. He said it was grown-up stuff, and I should never mess with it." When Arthur arrived home an hour later, he found Hope in the garden talking animatedly with Daisy. The scene seemed both touching and disturbing to him. There was a naturalness to their interaction that made him uncomfortable, as if they had known each other for much longer than a few days. "Hope, I didn't expect to find you here," he said, approaching with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "I came to get to know Daisy better," she replied, getting up from the grass. "She's an extraordinary girl, and very smart." Arthur noticed something different in Hope's gaze. There was an intensity there, a determination he hadn't seen in years, and there were also unshed tears, as if she were fighting powerful emotions. "Uncle Arthur," Daisy said, running to hug him. "Mrs. Hope knows the song Grandpa Jed used to sing to me." The girl's innocent comment made Arthur and Hope look at each other with a new understanding. There was much more going on here than either of them had initially imagined. And they both knew the revelations were just beginning. The revelation that Hope knew Daisy's lullaby left a heavy silence in the air. Arthur watched the two of them with growing unease, realizing there were connections between them that went far beyond what was apparent. The way Hope looked at Daisy was too intense to be just casual interest in an adopted child. That night, after Daisy had gone to sleep, Arthur couldn't rest. He paced the empty house, mentally replaying every detail of the afternoon. Hope's behavior, Daisy's reaction to the name Clements, the medallion the girl carried like a treasure. Everything seemed to be connected in a way he couldn't comprehend. Around midnight, he made a decision. He grabbed his car keys and drove to the simple apartment where he knew Hope lived, on the outskirts of the historic downtown. The living room light was on, indicating she couldn't sleep either. Hope answered the door still dressed, her eyes red from crying. For the past few hours, she had relived every painful moment of losing her daughter, comparing them with the information Daisy had unknowingly shared. "Arthur, what are you doing here at this hour?" "We need to talk," he said, noticing her emotional state. "About Daisy, about this Clements she mentioned, about everything that's happening." Hope hesitated for a moment, then opened the door completely. "Come in. I think it's past time we talked about a lot of things." The apartment was small but cozy, decorated with simplicity and a few personal items that told the story of a woman who had rebuilt her life after great loss. On the walls, old photographs showed Hope in happier times, including some from when she was pregnant. "Hope," Arthur began, sitting on the small sofa, "I need you to be honest with me. What really happened when you lost our daughter?" The direct question caught her off guard. For 5 years, she had avoided talking about that period, especially with him. But now, with the possibility that Daisy could be her daughter, silence was no longer an option. "You disappeared," she said, her voice heavy with old resentment. "You called off the wedding, moved out, wouldn't answer my calls. I was alone, pregnant, trying to understand what I had done wrong. I was sure the child wasn't mine," Arthur confessed, the weight of guilt evident in his voice. "That argument we had the night before the wedding, when you mentioned you had run into your ex-boyfriend a few weeks earlier. A chance meeting at the grocery store, a 5-minute conversation about work." Hope's voice rose, and she stood up from the sofa. "And because of that, you decided I was lying about the paternity?" "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared to commit. Scared of finding out later I'd been deceived. I chose to run rather than face the possibility of being rejected." Hope took a deep breath, trying to control her emotion. "Our daughter was born premature at just 7 months. She was in the neonatal ICU for weeks. I went to the hospital every day, talked to her through the incubator glass. I left a golden medallion around her neck so she would know she had a mother who loved her." The mention of the medallion made Arthur sit up straight. A golden medallion. A small angel, with an engraving on the back, "To my daughter with eternal love, H.T." I had it specially made for her. Hope sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. "One night I got a call from the hospital. They said she had suddenly taken a turn for the worse and that she had passed away during the night. And you saw the body." Hope shook her head. "When I got to the hospital, they said they had already taken care of everything, that it would be better if I didn't see. Dr. Bennett, the doctor in charge of the ICU, said it would be too traumatic. I was in shock. I couldn't think straight." The doctor's name sounded familiar to Arthur. Dr. Bennett had been a respected professional in the city, but he had retired abruptly a few years ago and had been living as a recluse ever since. There were rumors about ethical issues in his career, but nothing confirmed. "Hope, the medallion Daisy wears. It's identical to the one I left with our daughter. Not similar, identical. Even the little scratch I made when I dropped it on the hospital floor is there." The silence that followed was heavy with terrifying implications and impossible hopes. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, watching the empty streets of a sleeping Stone Creek. "Do you think Daisy could be—" "I don't know what to think," Hope said. "But so many things line up. The age, the medallion, the fragmented memories she has of the hospital, this nurse, Clemence, who disappeared at the same time. Tomorrow we're going to the old place where Daisy lived with Jed," Arthur decided. "If there's a hidden suitcase there with documents or information about Clemence, we need to find it." The next morning, Arthur made an excuse to Daisy about a business trip and left the girl in Dorothy's care. Along with Hope, he drove down the dirt roads leading into the countryside, following the vague directions Daisy had given about the location of Jed's homestead. The property was exactly as Daisy had described, a small adobe shack, a leafy tree in the yard, and clear signs of recent abandonment. The fence was broken in places, and weeds had grown wild around the structure. Daisy said there was a cellar, Hope remembered as they examined the simple house. They found the cellar entrance behind the house, covered by a heavy wooden hatch. Down below, in the damp, dark, makeshift basement, there were only a few old objects and, in the farthest corner, a brown leather suitcase that seemed out of place in that rustic environment. Arthur opened the suitcase with trembling hands. Inside, they found documents that changed everything. Birth certificates with false names, handwritten letters, photographs of babies, and most disturbingly of all, detailed medical records of several children, including one identified as patient HT, female infant, transferred to alternative custody. "Alternative custody?" Hope murmured, reading the document over Arthur's shoulder. Among the letters, they found one addressed specifically to Jed, dated 5 years ago and signed by Clemence. The content was a desperate confession. "Jed, I can't carry this burden anymore. Dr. Bennett forced me to be part of his scheme. He forged death certificates for babies who were actually sold to people who paid well for an illegal adoption. When I refused to continue, he threatened to report me as an accomplice. I took the girl from the incubator because I couldn't let her be sold to strangers. I know you'll take good care of her, like you promised to take care of me when we were kids. One day, when things calm down, I'll come back for her. Clemence." The revelation was devastating. Dr. Frank Bennett, the respected doctor who had consoled Hope in her moment of greatest pain, was actually the leader of a criminal baby-selling ring. And Daisy wasn't just an orphan child Arthur had saved out of compassion. She was his own daughter, whom he had rejected even before she was born. Hope collapsed in tears, clutching the letter to her chest. 5 years of mourning. 5 years of believing her daughter was dead, when in fact she was alive, growing up in the scrubland under the care of a simple man who had tried to protect her as best he could. "My daughter is alive," she whispered. "Our daughter is alive, and we didn't know." Arthur knelt beside Hope, guilt and joy mixing in his chest in an almost unbearable way. The brave child who had saved his life from the cougars was the same child he had rejected years ago, the daughter who had always been his, but whom he had been too cowardly to accept. "We have to confront Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice filled with determination and anger. "He has to pay for what he did, and we need his confession to legally establish that Daisy is our daughter." But when they returned to the city that afternoon, they discovered that Dr. Frank Bennett had disappeared. His house was empty, with no signs of a struggle or a hasty departure. The neighbors said they hadn't seen him in over a week. It was as if he had simply vanished, taking with him the last secrets of the scheme that had separated a family for 5 long years. The disappearance of Dr. Bennett left Arthur and Hope in a delicate situation. Although they had substantial evidence that Daisy was their biological daughter, the absence of the doctor who could officially confirm the criminal scheme complicated any immediate attempt at legal regularization. But there was something more urgent to resolve: how to tell the truth to a 4-year-old girl who had just found stability in her chaotic life. For the next 3 days, Arthur and Hope met secretly to plan the best way to approach the situation. Daisy noticed the tension in the air, but attributed it to grown-up things she didn't understand. She continued her normal activities, drawing in the garden, learning to read with Dorothy, and asking curious questions about everything around her. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Eugene Vance, Arthur's father, paid an unexpected visit to the mansion. At 65, Eugene was a man of imposing presence, with completely white hair and a piercing gaze that had intimidated business adversaries for decades. The owner of vast lands in the countryside and a partner in several regional companies, he rarely visited his son without a specific reason. "Arthur, I need to talk to you about this child situation," he said bluntly, walking into the main living room without waiting for an invitation. Daisy was playing in the garden, visible through the room's windows. Completely oblivious to the approaching storm, Arthur felt his stomach clench, realizing his father had found out about the adoption and clearly disapproved. "What situation, Dad?" "Don't play dumb with me, Arthur. The whole town is talking about you showing up out of nowhere with a dirty girl from the country, claiming it's an adoption. And now I hear you've been secretly meeting with Hope Taylor." Eugene's eyes glinted with disapproval. "Does that woman still have some kind of hold on you?" "Hope is my employee, and Hope is your ex-fiancé whom you abandoned at the altar. And now the two of you are playing happy family with a child of dubious origin." Eugene walked to the window, watching Daisy as she sat drawing on the grass. "Do you know who this girl's parents are? Do you have a birth certificate, documentation proving she wasn't acquired irregularly?" The question hit Arthur like a punch. His father was dangerously close to the truth, but for entirely the wrong reasons. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that you might be getting involved in something that will destroy our family's reputation. The family businesses are going through a delicate moment, Arthur. We've invested heavily in lands that aren't generating the expected returns, and any scandal now could be fatal." Eugene turned to face his son directly. "This child has to go. Today." "Absolutely not," Arthur replied, his voice filled with a firmness that surprised even himself. "Daisy is my daughter now, and she will continue to be." "Your daughter?" Eugene laughed bitterly. "You don't have a paternal bone in your body, Arthur. You ran from responsibility once, when Hope was pregnant. What guarantee do I have that you won't abandon this child too, when the novelty wears off?" The accusation hurt because it carried a grain of truth. Arthur knew his track record as a responsible and committed man was questionable. But something had changed inside him since Daisy had risked her own life to save him. The courage of that little girl had awakened qualities in him he didn't know he possessed. "Things are different now." "Different how?" "Because you feel guilty for being saved by a starving child. That's not paternal love, Arthur. It's misplaced gratitude." At that moment, Irene Vance, Arthur's mother, entered the room silently. At 60, she maintained the quiet elegance that had always characterized her, but there was something tense in her posture. Irene rarely got involved in the business discussions between her husband and son, preferring to stay out of conflicts. Her presence there indicated the situation was more serious than Arthur imagined. "Eugene, I think you're being too harsh," she said softly, but there was a sadness in her voice that caught his attention. "Irene, stay out of this. This is about protecting the family. Maybe it's time to stop protecting and start fixing," she murmured, looking through the window at Daisy. There was something in his mother's tone that made Arthur move closer to her. "Mom, what do you mean by that?" Irene was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with some internal decision. Finally, she turned to face her husband and son. "I know about Dr. Frank Bennett," she said, her words falling like bombs in the silent room. "I know about his scheme, about the children, about everything." Eugene turned visibly pale. "Irene, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I've kept silent for years about something that haunts me every night, that I was a silent accomplice to something terrible because I was afraid of the consequences." Arthur felt the floor disappear from under his feet. "Mom, how do you know about Dr. Bennett?" "Because he came to me 3 years ago, drunk and desperate. He said he couldn't live with the guilt of what he'd done anymore. He told me about the baby-selling scheme, about how he forged death certificates, about the families he destroyed." Irene sat down heavily in an armchair, as if the weight of years of silence was finally crushing her. "And you did nothing?" Arthur asked, horrified. "He begged me to keep it secret. He said several influential families in the region were involved, that revealing the scheme would destroy many innocent people, and he gave me something in exchange for my silence." "What?" Eugene asked, his voice a low growl. "Information about where Hope Taylor's daughter was." The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur was paralyzed, processing the magnitude of what his mother had just revealed. "You knew our daughter was alive?" "I found out 3 years ago. Dr. Bennett told me a nurse named Clemens had taken the baby to a man in the countryside named Jed. But he also said the child was safe and well cared for, that it was better to leave things as they were." "Better for whom?" Arthur exploded. "Hope spent 5 years mourning a daughter who was alive. I lived for 5 years with guilt for rejecting my own child." "I tried to tell you several times," Irene defended herself, tears streaming down her face. "But you were so bitter, so closed off to any conversation about the past. And I was afraid that finding out the truth would completely destroy you." Eugene remained silent, but his expression revealed that he too had known something. The web of secrets that held the family together was rapidly unraveling. "Dad," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low, "did you know too?" "I found out last year when Irene told me during one of her anxiety attacks, but I also thought it was better to let the past stay buried. Our financial situation is more fragile than you imagine, Arthur. Any scandal involving criminal schemes, even if we are victims, could destroy everything we've built. So you preferred to let Hope suffer and let me live in ignorance to protect the family business." "Ooh, we preferred to protect you from a pain we thought was unnecessary," Irene said. "The child was fine. You had both moved on with your lives." "Neither of us moved on," Arthur shouted, completely losing his composure. "Hope never recovered from the loss. I became a bitter man, unable to trust anyone, and our daughter grew up not knowing who she really was." At that moment, the living room door opened and Daisy appeared, her large eyes wide at the sound of shouting. She held a new drawing in her hand, but her expression showed fear and confusion. "Uncle Arthur, why are you yelling?" she asked in her small voice. The innocent presence of the girl silenced everyone in the room instantly. Arthur knelt in front of her, trying to control his emotions. "I'm sorry. Little one, grown-ups sometimes argue about complicated things." Daisy looked at Irene and Eugene, then turned her attention back to Arthur. "Don't they like me?" The simple, direct question cut to the heart of everyone present. Irene rose from the armchair and approached the granddaughter she didn't know was hers. "We like you very much, dear," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Sometimes grown-ups just need to talk about how to better care for the people we love." But Eugene remained inflexible. Even in the face of Daisy's innocence, he saw only complications and risks to the stability he had built over decades. "This conversation isn't over," he said, heading for the exit. "We have bigger problems approaching, Arthur, and a child in the middle of this mess will make everything much more complicated." When Arthur's parents left, Daisy went to the window and pointed at a bird that had landed in the garden. "Uncle Arthur, that little bird is all alone. I wonder where its family is." The girl's innocent question echoed in Arthur's mind like a prophecy. In a few short hours, everything he thought he knew about his family had crumbled, and he had no idea how to rebuild the pieces to create a real home for the daughter he had so unexpectedly recovered. Irene's confession about her knowledge of Daisy's whereabouts completely changed the family dynamic. In the following days, the Vance mansion became a silent battlefield, where accusatory glances replaced conversations. Arthur could barely look at his mother without feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment that consumed him from within. Hope, when she learned of the revelation from Arthur, experienced a fury she didn't know she possessed. For 3 years, she had worked for the family that knew where her daughter was, politely greeting the woman who could have ended her suffering at any moment. The sense of betrayal was so intense that she had to take a few days off from work to process her emotions. Daisy, oblivious to the emotional storms of the adults around her, continued to adapt to her new life. But her childish sensitivity picked up on the unspoken tensions. Her drawings, once full of colorful birds and happy landscapes, began to include figures of people standing far apart, as if she subconsciously sensed that something was fragmenting her new family. It was during one of these tense afternoons that a phone call changed everything. Carmen, the nursing tech who had provided the first information about Clemens, called Hope with urgent news. "Hope, you need to come to the hospital now. Dr. Bennett is here." "What do you mean he's there? Hadn't he disappeared?" "He was admitted to the emergency room last night. He was very sick, almost unconscious, and he's specifically asking to speak with you." Hope immediately called Arthur, who left Daisy with Dorothy and rushed to meet her at the hospital. The drive there was made in tense silence, both preparing to finally confront the man who had orchestrated the separation of their family. Dr. Frank Bennett was unrecognizable. The once imposing and respected doctor had become a skeletal figure, with jaundiced skin and sunken eyes of someone battling a serious illness. He was alone in a small room in the palliative care wing, connected to machines monitoring his weak vital signs. "Hope," he murmured when he saw her enter, his voice a rough whisper. "You came." "I came for answers," she replied, keeping her distance from the bed. Arthur positioned himself beside her, a silent but intimidating presence. "I know why you're here," the doctor said, closing his eyes as if gathering strength. "You found the girl, Daisy." "We know everything, Dr. Bennett," Arthur said, "about the scheme, about Clemens, about the false certificates. What we want now is your official confession." The doctor opened his eyes and looked directly at Hope. "Your daughter never died. I made up that story because there were powerful people involved in the scheme, people who paid very well for healthy babies for illegal adoption." "What people?" Arthur asked. But Dr. Bennett shook his head weakly. That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that Clemence refused to hand your daughter over to the buyers. She had a soft heart, always got attached to the children she cared for in the ICU. The doctor coughed violently before continuing. When she threatened to report me, I panicked. I let her take the girl to the countryside, thinking it would be temporary. Temporary, Hope exploded. Temporary was 5 years of my life believing my daughter was dead. I planned to resolve the situation after the pressure subsided. But Clemence disappeared completely, and I couldn't locate where she had left the child. Dr. Bennett tried to sit up in bed, but he didn't have the strength. Over time, I convinced myself it was maybe for the best. The girl was being raised far from the whole sordid scheme. And the other children? Arthur asked. How many families did you destroy? Many, the doctor admitted, tears streaming down his skeletal face. Families who paid for adoptions, families who lost their babies. It was a vicious cycle that started small and grew until it was out of control. Hope approached the bed, her anger giving way to a cold determination. I want you to record an official confession. I want you to admit what you did to our daughter and to all the other families. It's all been recorded, said a voice at the door. They all turned to see Eugene Vance entering the room, holding a small recorder in his hands. His presence was completely unexpected and disturbing. Eugene, Dr. Bennett murmured, his face turning even paler. How did you know I was here? I have my contacts at the hospital, Frank, and I was waiting for you to show up. Eugene approached the bed, his expression hard and implacable. I've already recorded everything you've said for the last 5 minutes. Arthur looked at his father with growing suspicion. What are you doing here, Dad? Protecting our family, as I've always done. Eugene pocketed the recorder. Dr. Bennett will sign a full confession admitting his involvement in the scheme, declaring that he acted alone, and confirming that Daisy is your legitimate daughter. In exchange for what? Hope asked, sensing there was more to the proposal. In exchange for ensuring that no other names will be mentioned in the investigation that will surely follow this confession, Eugene replied coldly. Dr. Bennett closed his eyes, clearly understanding the implications. You want me to protect the families who bought children. I want you to protect innocent people who were deceived by you, thinking they were making legal adoptions, Eugene corrected. People who didn't know the criminal origin of the children they adopted. Arthur felt a cold pit in his stomach. Dad, how many influential families are involved in this? Enough that revealing everything would destroy the social and economic structure of the region, Eugene answered, including important clients of our companies, business partners, even local authorities. The scale of the scheme was becoming clear. It wasn't just one corrupt doctor selling babies, it was a complex network involving powerful people throughout the region. And Eugene wanted to use Dr. Bennett's confession to protect these people, even if it meant limiting justice. This is blackmail, Hope said, horrified. This is survival, Eugene retorted. You've gotten your daughter back. Now you can have a normal life together. But if you insist on exposing the entire scheme, you'll destroy not only the guilty, but also dozens of innocent families who raised children as their own. Dr. Bennett opened his eyes and looked directly at Hope. He's right about one thing. There are children who were raised by loving families who didn't know their true origin. Destroying those families now won't undo the harm that's already been done. But it will stop it from happening again, Arthur argued. The scheme is already over, Dr. Bennett said. It ended when Clemence ran away with your daughter. I could never organize anything again after that. The guilt consumed me. The silence in the room was heavy with impossible decisions. Hope looked at the man who had stolen 5 years of her life as a mother, then at Eugene, who wanted to limit justice for economic interests, and finally at Arthur, who seemed as lost as she was. I want my daughter officially recognized as ours, she said finally. "I want documents that prove her true identity. The rest, we'll decide later." Dr. Bennett nodded weakly. "I'll sign whatever is necessary, and I'll hand over all the files I have on Daisy's case. It's the least I can do." 2 hours later, all the documents were signed. Dr. Bennett had provided a detailed confession about Daisy's specific case, admitting to the falsification of her death certificate and confirming her true identity as the daughter of Hope and Arthur. But he had carefully avoided mentioning other names or cases. When they left the hospital, Arthur and Hope walked in silence to the parking lot. They both knew they had gotten what they came for, but the taste of partial victory was bitter. "Are we going to tell Daisy?" Hope asked. "We have to," Arthur replied. "But how do you explain to a 4-year-old that the adults she trusted have been lying to her whole life?" "We explain that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes, but that true love always finds a way to fix things," Hope said, looking up at the darkening sky. When they arrived at the mansion, they found Daisy in the garden, playing with a butterfly that had landed on her hand. She smiled when she saw them arrive together, unaware that her life was about to change again, this time forever. The task of telling Daisy the truth proved more complex than Arthur and Hope had imagined. For 3 days, they rehearsed different ways to approach the subject, but they always ran into the same difficulty: how to explain concepts like document forgery and criminal schemes to a child who had barely turned 5 and whose only experience with adults until recently had been marked by abandonment and loneliness. Hope had temporarily moved into a guest room at Arthur's mansion, a practical decision that allowed her to spend more time with Daisy while they gradually built a relationship. For the girl, Hope's constant presence was a source of confused joy. She felt an inexplicable connection to this gentle woman who sang the same songs that Grandpa Jed used to sing. "Mrs. Hope," Daisy said one morning as they had breakfast together in the garden, "do you have any children?" The simple question hit Hope like an arrow. I had a daughter once, but she got sick when she was a baby." "Did she get better?" Hope looked into those big, innocent eyes, the same eyes she had imagined thousands of times during 5 years of grief. "Yes, sweetie, she got completely better." Daisy smiled, satisfied with the answer. "Then she must be happy now. Kids like being healthy so they can play." It was at that moment that Arthur appeared on the veranda, watching the interaction between the two. There was something deeply touching in the naturalness with which Daisy and Hope talked, as if they were 2 pieces of a puzzle that had finally found each other. "Daisy," he said, approaching the table, "Hope and I want to talk to you about something very important." The girl looked up, her expression turning slightly worried. In recent days, she had noticed that the adults around her were different, more serious, whispering conversations that stopped when she approached. "Is it about me?" she asked with the keen perception of children. "It's about your family," Hope replied softly. "About who your real parents are." Daisy tilted her head, confused. "But Grandpa Jed said my parents went on a trip and never came back." Arthur knelt beside her chair, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes adults tell stories that are different from the truth to protect children from things that might hurt them. Grandpa Jed loved you very much and wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Hope took Daisy's small hand in hers. "Protect you from knowing that bad people had separated you from your real parents when you were very little." Daisy's eyes widened. "Bad people?" "Yes," Arthur confirmed. "But now those people can't hurt anyone anymore, and we found out who your real parents are." Daisy looked from Arthur to Hope, then back to him. A slow understanding began to form in her young mind. "You too?" "Yes." "My darling," Hope said, tears streaming down her face, "I'm your real mother, and Arthur is your real father." Daisy's reaction was unexpected. Instead of joy or surprise, she became very quiet. processing the information with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. Finally, she asked, "Why did you leave me with Grandpa Jed?" The question was like a stab wound. Arthur felt the crushing weight of the guilt he had carried for 5 years, while Hope struggled to find words a child could understand. "We didn't leave you, my daughter," Hope explained. "When you were born, you were sick and had to stay in the hospital. Bad people lied to us. They told us that you had gone away forever. We thought we would never see you again, and we cried a lot," Arthur added, "every day for a long time." Daisy absorbed this information in silence. Then she asked, "Did Grandpa Jed know you were my parents?" "We don't know for sure," Hope admitted, "but we think he knew someone was looking for you. That's why he took such good care of you until he could return you to your real family. He brought me back to you." Daisy's eyes shone with a new understanding. "In a way, yes," Arthur said. "He taught you to be brave and strong, and when you saved me from the cougars, it was like he was introducing us to each other." For the first time since the conversation began, Daisy smiled. "Grandpa Jed always said that birds know how to find their way home, even when they fly very far away. And you're our little bird who came back home," Hope said, hugging the daughter she had lost and found again. But adapting to the new reality was not simple. In the following days, Daisy went through moments of emotional confusion. Sometimes she would call Hope Mom naturally. Other times she would correct herself and revert to Mrs. Hope. With Arthur, she continued to use Uncle Arthur, and as if she still needed time to accept that he was her father. During one of these difficult afternoons of adjustment, Irene Vance paid an unannounced visit. She found Daisy alone in the garden, drawing in her notebook, while Arthur and Hope were in the office handling legal matters. "Hi, Grandma Irene," Daisy said, using the title she had spontaneously created for Arthur's mother. "Hi, my dear," Irene replied, sitting on the grass beside the girl. "Can I see your drawings?" Daisy's most recent drawings showed a clear evolution. There were fewer lonely birds and more groups of people, but these people seemed to be in uncomfortable positions, as if they didn't know how to stand in relation to one another. "This one is me," Daisy explained, pointing to a small figure in the center of a drawing. "And these are my mom Hope and my dad Arthur, but they're kind of far away from me sometimes." "Why?" "I think they're still learning how to be my parents," the girl said with a wisdom that surprised Irene. "And I'm still learning how to be their daughter." Irene felt her heart ache. For years, she had carried the burden of knowing where her granddaughter was without being able to say anything. Now, finally reunited with her family, she desperately wanted to build a relationship with Daisy. "Daisy, can I tell you a secret?" "You can. I always knew you existed. I always knew I had a special little granddaughter somewhere. And I always dreamed of the day I could meet you." Daisy stopped drawing and looked directly at Irene. "You knew I was your granddaughter. In the bottom of my heart, I always knew. And now that you're here, my life is complete." At that moment, Eugene appeared in the garden, looking for his wife. When he saw Irene sitting on the grass talking with Daisy, his expression softened slightly. For days, he had been fighting his own prejudices and fears about having a granddaughter who appeared out of nowhere. "Grandpa Eugene!" Daisy shouted, running to hug him. The girl's spontaneous hug completely disarmed Eugene's defenses. He picked her up, feeling for the first time the reality of having a granddaughter who carried the Vance family genes and the extraordinary courage that had saved his son's life. "You draw very well," he said, looking at the notebook she had left on the grass. "Do you want me to draw you too? I can make a drawing of our whole family together." "I'd like that very much," Eugene admitted, realizing his resistance was crumbling one by one. When Arthur and Hope came out of the office, they found a scene that filled them with hope. Daisy drawing intently while Irene and Eugene watched, making suggestions and laughing at the girls' creative explanations. "Done!" Daisy announced, showing them the new drawing. "Our family complete." The paper showed 5 figures holding hands. Daisy in the center, flanked by Hope and Arthur, with Irene and Eugene at the ends. Above them all, she had drawn a tall man with white hair, and the caption, "Grandpa Jed in heaven, watching over all of us." All the adults were moved by the respectful inclusion of Jed in the new family configuration. Daisy had found a way to honor the past while embracing the present. "Now we're a real family," she said, smiling at everyone, "and no one is going to get lost anymore." That night, for the first time since the revelation, Daisy slept soundly, without nightmares or moments of anxiety. It was as if she finally understood that despite all the lies and confusion of the past, she had found her place in the world. A place surrounded by people who truly loved her and who would never let her get lost again. 6 months after the truth was revealed, the life of the reconstituted family had found a more stable rhythm, but not without constant challenges. Daisy, now officially recognized as Daisy Vance Taylor, attended a private school in Stone Creek, where her exceptional intelligence impressed teachers and classmates. But social adaptation was not simple for a child who had spent the first years of her life isolated in the scrubland. Hope had moved permanently into the Vance mansion, occupying the room next to Daisy's. Although they were not married, she and Arthur had found a co-parenting arrangement that worked for their daughter's well-being. The girl thrived in the constant presence of both parents, but there were still moments when her insecurity surfaced, especially when either of them had to travel for work. "Is Mommy really coming back?" Daisy would ask whenever Hope left to handle personal matters at her old apartment. The experience of abandonment had created in her a constant need for confirmation that the important people in her life would not disappear again. "I will always come back, my love," Hope would answer patiently. "Now that I've found you, I'll never leave you again." It was during one of these temporary absences of Hope's that Daisy had her first significant emotional crisis since the revelation. She woke up in the middle of the night screaming, calling for Grandpa Jed and saying she had lost the golden medallion she always wore around her neck. Arthur rushed to her room, finding her in a total panic. "The medallion is gone. Grandpa Jed said I could never lose the medallion." "Calm down, little one. We'll look for it together," he said, turning on all the lights in the room. They searched everywhere, turning over pillows, looking under the bed, checking every corner where the golden chain might have fallen. It was only when Daisy calmed down enough to think clearly that she remembered leaving the medallion in the bathroom before her bath. "It's here," Arthur said, finding the piece on the sink. "It's safe." But when he turned to give the medallion back to Daisy, he found her crying silently. "Daddy, I'm afraid I'll forget Grandpa Jed. He took care of me when no one else could, and now sometimes I go the whole day without thinking about him." The girl's concern touched Arthur deeply. "Daisy, it's normal for you to think less about Grandpa Jed now that you have a full family. It doesn't mean you've forgotten him or that he wasn't important. But what if I forget what he was like? What if I forget the stories he told?" Arthur had an idea. "How about we write a book about Grandpa Jed? You can tell me everything you remember about him, and I'll help you write it down. That way, you'll never forget." The idea excited Daisy immediately. For the next few weeks, they spent an hour every night working on the Book of Grandpa Jed. Daisy dictated her memories, and Arthur transcribed them, creating a loving record of the man who had cared for her when she needed it most. It was during one of these writing sessions that Eugene knocked on the office door with a worried expression Arthur knew well. It was the same face his father made when there were serious problems with the business. "I need to talk to you, Arthur. It's urgent." You can talk in front of Daisy, Dad. She already knows we're a family now. Eugene hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It's about the company's finances. The situation is more serious than I previously admitted. What do you mean? The lands we bought in the countryside are not only not generating profit, we've discovered they were sold with fraudulent documentation. We've lost almost everything we invested, and now creditors are calling in debts we can't pay. Arthur's blood ran cold. How much time do we have? A few weeks at most. If we can't raise capital quickly, we'll have to sell the bakeries, the house, everything. Daisy, who had been listening to the conversation intently, asked a question that left both men speechless. If you lose everything, will you still be able to take care of me? Of course we will, honey, Arthur said immediately. No matter what happens with the money, you will always be our priority. But where will we live if we lose the house? Eugene and Arthur looked at each other, realizing they hadn't fully considered how a financial crisis would affect Daisy. The girl had finally found stability, and now they might be forced to destabilize everything again. We'll find a solution, Eugene promised, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. Urgent meetings were held daily, phones rang constantly, and whispered conversations stopped abruptly when Daisy approached. The girl, with her keen sensitivity, sensed that something serious was happening. It was during one of these tense afternoons that Hope received an unexpected visitor at her old apartment, where she still kept some personal belongings. Clement Sanders was at the door, visibly nervous and aged by years on the run. "Hope? I'm Clements. I need to talk to you about Daisy." The initial shock was quickly replaced by a mixture of anger and curiosity. "How dare you show up here after what you did?" "I know you have every reason to hate me," Clements said, her hands shaking, "but I heard you found out the truth, and I need to tell you the rest of the story." "What rest? You stole my daughter." "I saved your daughter!" Clements burst out. "Dr. Bennett didn't tell you everything in his confession. He didn't say that your little girl was going to be sold to a family in the capital, people who treated adopted children like property." Hope felt her legs weaken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when I took Daisy from the incubator, it wasn't just to hurt you. It was because I found out who the buyers were, and I couldn't let an innocent child fall into their hands." Clements entered the apartment uninvited, clearly agitated. "The family that had bought your daughter had a history of mistreating previously adopted children, but they were influential people with powerful connections, and Dr. Bennett couldn't refuse the deal." "And why didn't you tell me the truth at the time?" "Because if I had, you would have gone after your daughter, and they would have eliminated you to protect the scheme. These people didn't play around, Hope. They had the resources and influence to make anyone disappear." The revelation left Hope stunned. For 5 years she had hated Clements for stealing her daughter, when in fact the nurse had risked her own life to protect Daisy. "Who were these people?" she asked. Clements hesitated. "A very wealthy family from Dallas. The patriarch owned several companies, had important political connections. They wanted a girl to complete their family, but they treated children like collector's items." "And now? Why are you here now?" "Because I heard about the financial crisis the Vance family is facing, and I'm sure it's not a coincidence." Hope frowned. "What do you mean?" "The lands they bought with fraudulent documentation. It was a trap. The family from Dallas found out where Daisy was and decided to get revenge by financially destroying the Vances. They want to force you to hand over the girl in exchange for financial help." The world seemed to collapse around Hope. "That's impossible. Dr. Bennett confessed that he acted alone. Dr. Bennett lied to protect powerful people, including that family. And now they're coming after the child they believe is their property." Clements approached Hope, her eyes shining with urgency. "You're in danger, all of you. And Daisy. They won't give up easily on a child they consider was stolen from them. At that moment, Hope understood that the battle for her family was far from over. The forces that had tried to destroy her life 5 years ago had returned, more powerful and determined than ever. And now, it wasn't just her daughter at risk. It was the entire family they had fought so hard to rebuild. Clemence's revelation about the Dallas family sent Hope into a panic. She rushed back to the Vance mansion, finding Arthur in his office trying to solve the financial crisis that now had much more sinister undertones. When she told him about Clemence's visit and the information about the true origin of the family's financial troubles, Arthur's face turned pale. "Are you sure she was telling the truth?" he asked, cutting off the call he was on with a potential investor. "She was terrified, Arthur. That wasn't a woman lying. That was someone who is still on the run, still afraid of what these people can do." That night, after Daisy had gone to sleep, Hope, Arthur, Eugene, and Irene gathered in the living room for a conversation that would change everything. Clemence had agreed to attend the meeting, but only on the promise that her identity would be protected and that she could leave immediately after providing the information. "The family that wanted to buy Daisy is named Driscoll," Clemence began, her hands shaking as she held a cup of coffee. "Richard Driscoll owns a construction company that handles public works all over the Southwest. He has political connections that reach all the way to D.C. And they really believe they have a right to our daughter?" Hope asked, still struggling to accept the reality. To them, it was a business transaction that wasn't completed. They paid Dr. Bennett, expected to receive the goods, and were deceived. Clemence used the word goods with evident disgust. For 5 years, they quietly investigated where the child was until they found out that you had found her. Eugene spoke for the first time. "How did they manage to orchestrate the land fraud?" "Richard Driscoll has contacts in county clerks' offices, corrupt lawyers, people who create fake documentation for shell companies. Setting a financial trap for you was relatively simple for someone with his resources." "And what's the end game?" Arthur asked. "To destroy you financially, to the point where handing over Daisy seems like the only option to save what's left of the family. They are patient, methodical. They prefer to break people psychologically before resorting to more direct methods." Irene, who had remained silent, asked a question that chilled everyone's blood. "And if we refuse to hand over our granddaughter?" Clemence looked directly at her. "Then they will resort to alternatives you don't want to consider." The silence that followed was filled with terror. They all understood they were dealing with unscrupulous people, willing to do anything to get what they wanted. "We have to leave," Hope said. "Leave Texas, change our names, start over somewhere else." "With what money?" Eugene asked bitterly. "We don't have the resources to run and start over, and even if we did, people like Richard Driscoll have a national reach." "So what do you suggest?" Arthur exploded. "That we hand over our daughter to save the family business?" "Never," Eugene replied firmly. "But we need to be smart. Confronting this man head-on would be suicide." It was at that moment that Clemence revealed the most important information of the night. "There is a way to take down Richard Driscoll, but it's extremely dangerous." "How?" they all asked simultaneously. "He keeps detailed records of all the illegal transactions he makes, including the purchases of children. He's a meticulous man who documents everything to ensure he can blackmail anyone who tries to betray him." Clemence took a deep breath. "Those files are in his house in Dallas. If we could get them into the right authorities' hands, it would be our ruin against his." Arthur completed. "Exactly. But accessing those files would be almost impossible. The house is a fortress. He has private security, alarm systems, and inside knowledge," said a voice at the living room door. They all turned to see Dr. Frank Bennett, leaning on a cane and visibly more frail than the last time they saw him at the hospital. "Dr. Bennett?" Hope murmured. "How did you—" "De Clemence contacted me last night. She said you were in danger because of the Driscolls." He entered the room with difficulty, but his voice carried determination. "I'm dying. Terminal cancer. I have nothing left to lose, and this may be my only chance to try to repair some of the harm I've caused." "You know Richard Driscoll's house?" Eugene asked. "I know it very well. I went there several times to deliver goods. I know where he keeps the files. I know the security routine. I know the system's weak points." Arthur stood up, pacing the room as he processed the possibilities. "Are you suggesting we break into the home of one of the most powerful men in the Southwest?" "I'm suggesting we recover evidence that can save not only Daisy, but dozens of other families that were destroyed by this scheme." Dr. Bennett sat down heavily in an armchair. "Richard Driscoll ruined my life too. After I stopped providing children for him, he made sure to destroy my medical reputation, ensured I could never work again." "It's too risky," Hope said. "More risky than letting a man like him run free. Hunting our daughter for the rest of her life," Arthur retorted. For the next 2 hours, they devised a desperate plan. Dr. Bennett would provide detailed information about the house and Richard Driscoll's routine. Clemence, who knew other former employees of the scheme, would try to recruit someone willing to testify. Arthur and Hope would be responsible for contacting trusted investigative journalists who could provide proper coverage for the revelations. "And Daisy?" Irene asked. "How do we protect our granddaughter while all this is happening?" "She can't know anything," Hope said firmly. "She's been through enough trauma. She has to keep believing she's safe." "I'll take her to the family's country house," Eugene suggested. "It's isolated, has only one access road, easy to watch. Irene can stay there with her while we handle this situation." But when they went to check on Daisy before finalizing the plans, they found her room empty. The window was open, and there were signs that someone had entered through the tree that stood near the wall. "Daisy!" Hope screamed, running through the house's corridors. They searched everywhere, but it was clear the girl was no longer in the mansion. On the windowsill, they found a note written in adult handwriting. "If you want to see the girl again, stop any plans you are making against our family immediately. Await contact. Daisy is safe, but that can change if you make the wrong decisions." The nightmare they all feared had become a reality. Richard Driscoll had taken the initiative, and now Daisy was in the hands of the same people who had tried to buy her like an object 5 years ago. Hope collapsed on the floor of the empty room, clutching the note to her chest. After finally getting her daughter back, after building a family, after believing the suffering was over, she was once again separated from the child she loved more than life itself. "We will find her," Arthur promised, kneeling beside Hope. "No matter what we have to do, we will bring our daughter back." But they all knew that they were now dealing with an adversary who would not hesitate to use an innocent child as a bargaining chip. And time was running out fast. The first 24 hours after Daisy's disappearance were the longest of Hope and Arthur's lives. The Vance mansion had transformed into a makeshift command center, with Dr. Bennett providing details about the Driscoll family, while Clemence tried to contact other survivors of the scheme who might be able to help. Hope couldn't eat or sleep. She walked the empty hallways, repeatedly entering Daisy's room to touch the objects the girl had left behind. The drawings scattered on the desk. The book about Grandpa Jed they were writing together, the golden medallion that had fallen during the struggle and remained forgotten on the floor. "She must be terrified," Hope murmured for the 10th time that morning. "Our daughter doesn't even know why she was taken. To her, it's just another inexplicable abandonment." Arthur tried to stay focused on action, but guilt consumed him. "If I hadn't insisted on confronting Richard Driscoll, this never would have happened. We should have run when Clements warned us. Running wouldn't have helped, said Dr. Bennett, reviewing maps of the Driscoll estate near Dallas. Men like Richard don't give up. He would have hunted us to the ends of the earth if necessary. The phone rang at exactly 2 in the afternoon, interrupting the tense conversations. Eugene answered, immediately putting it on speakerphone so everyone could hear. "Vance family," said a cold, controlled male voice. "I imagine you're worried about the child." "Where is our daughter?" Hope exploded, unable to contain herself. "She is safe and well cared for in a place where she can receive the proper education she deserves, far from the influence of people who stole her from her rightful family." "We are her rightful family," Arthur shouted. "You are thieves who took advantage of forged documentation to steal a child who was legally acquired by our family 5 years ago." The cynicism in the man's voice was sickening. Dr. Bennett made urgent signs for them to keep the conversation going as long as possible, while Clements tried to trace the call's origin on a connected cell phone. "What do you want?" Eugene asked, forcing himself to sound controlled. "We want you to stop this charade of a happy family and recognize the reality. The girl belongs to the Driscolls, and any attempt to retrieve her will result in unpleasant consequences for all involved." "Prove she's okay," Hope demanded. "We want to talk to Daisy." There was a pause, followed by the sound of footsteps and a door opening. Then Daisy's small, frightened voice echoed over the phone. "Mommy, Daddy, why did you leave me with these strange people? I want to go home." The sound of his daughter crying was like a dagger in Hope's heart. "My daughter, it's okay. We're coming to get you soon, I promise. The lady said you don't want me anymore. That's why you gave me to her, but that's not true, is it? You still love me?" "We love you more than anything in the world," Arthur shouted. "We would never leave you on purpose. We're—" The call was abruptly cut, leaving everyone in desperate silence. Hope collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The cruelty of using a 5-year-old as a psychological weapon was unbearable. "I got a trace," Clements announced, looking at the phone screen. The call came from a tower in a rural area about 25 miles from Dallas. "It's consistent with the location of the Driscolls' country estate." Dr. Bennett nodded gravely. "That's where they take the children before finalizing the adoptions. An isolated ranch, with a large house where they can keep the children conditioned before handing them over to the buying families." "Conditioned how?" Arthur asked, dreading the answer. "They teach the child to accept the new family, convince them that their previous family abandoned them, create emotional dependency." Dr. Bennett couldn't finish the sentence. Hope stood up abruptly. "I'm going there to get her. I don't care how many guards they have. I'm not going to let our daughter be brainwashed." "Hope, you can't go alone," Arthur said. "That's exactly what they want, for us to make desperate decisions." "Then what's the alternative? Sit here and wait while they psychologically destroy our daughter?" At that moment, Clements received a call that changed everything. "It was Joshua," she said, hanging up the phone. "He used to be a driver for Dr. Bennett back in the day, knows every corner of the Driscoll ranch." "And he's willing to help us?" Eugene asked. "He is. His own daughter was a victim of the scheme, sold to a family in another state 3 years ago. He wants revenge as much as we do." Dr. Bennett's spirits lifted. "With Joshua on our side, we have a real chance. He knows the guards' shifts, where the cameras are, all the entrances to the property." Over the next few hours, they worked out a risky but viable plan. Joshua would provide real-time information about the ranch's security. Dr. Bennett, despite his weakened condition, insisted on accompanying the group to identify where Daisy was being held. Clements would contact investigative journalists to ensure that, regardless of the outcome, the story would go public. "And what if we don't succeed?" asked Irene, who had remained silent during the planning. "We will," Arthur said with steely determination. "We have no other choice." At the ranch, Daisy was locked in a room decorated like a fairy tale, but it felt more like a golden prison. Maria Driscoll, Richard's wife, had spent the afternoon trying to convince the girl that her previous life had been a mistake. "You weren't happy with those people, dear," she said with false kindness. "They left you alone in the wild, let you go hungry, never gave you the education you deserve." "That's not true," Daisy protested. "My parents love me. They take care of me. If they truly loved you, they wouldn't have let you be taken so easily. A real mother would die before letting someone take her child." The cruel words planted seeds of doubt in Daisy's young mind. Why hadn't her parents stopped her from being taken? Why hadn't they come for her yet? "Here you will have everything you've ever wanted," Maria continued. "Expensive toys, beautiful clothes, private school education. Much better than that house where you were just an intruder." "I wasn't an intruder. They wanted me." "Then why are you here with us now?" The simple question shattered Daisy's emotional defenses. She curled up on the luxurious bed, clutching the only familiar object she had with her, a small paper bird she had made with Arthur the night before she was taken. Meanwhile, on the highway between their town and Dallas, a discreet car carried the rescue team toward the final showdown. Hope held Daisy's golden medallion tightly, whispering silent prayers. Arthur drove with relentless determination, his eyes fixed on the road that would lead him to his daughter. Dr. Bennett, sitting in the back with Clements and Joshua, reviewed the plan one last time. "Remember, we only get one shot. If we're discovered before we locate Daisy, they could move her to another location we'll never find." "We won't fail," Hope said. "Our daughter is waiting for us." But they all knew they were preparing for the most important battle of their lives, where defeat meant losing Daisy forever, and where victory would depend on courage, luck, and maybe a miracle. As they neared the ranch, each member of the group mentally prepared for what was to come, knowing that the next few hours would determine the future of an innocent child who had become the center of a war between two families who both claimed to love her. The Driscoll Ranch emerged from the night's darkness like an imposing fortress, surrounded by high walls and illuminated by strategically placed floodlights. Hope, Arthur, and their makeshift team watched the property from a nearby hill, studying the movements of the guards who patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals. "2 sentries at the main gate, 1 at the back entrance, and probably 2 more doing rounds inside," whispered Joshua, pointing to the moving lights on the property. "The room where they keep the children is in the east wing, 2nd floor." Dr. Bennett, despite his evident weakness, had insisted on accompanying the group this far. "Richard keeps the files in the ground floor office," he murmured. "If we can access those documents while you rescue Daisy—" "The first objective is our daughter," Hope interrupted firmly. "The files are secondary." Clemence checked her phone one last time. "The reporters are in position on the main road. If something goes wrong, at least the story will be told." At 2 in the morning, when the security shifts changed and there was a brief window of confusion, they approached the property. Joshua knew a section of the wall where the vegetation had grown enough to offer cover. One by one, they climbed into the ranch, their hearts pounding like drums. Inside the house, Daisy was awake, looking out the window of the room where she was locked. During the day, Maria Driscoll had intensified her efforts to convince her that her previous family had abandoned her. The seeds of doubt planted were beginning to sprout in the girl's confused mind. "Maybe they really don't want me anymore," she murmured to the paper bird she held. "If they really loved me, they would have come to get me by now." It was in this moment of despair that she heard a subtle sound on the outer wall, as if someone was trying to climb the vine that grew alongside the window. Daisy approached the glass, her heart leaping as she recognized the familiar silhouette scaling toward her. "Daddy!" she whispered, barely believing her eyes. Arthur had chosen the riskiest route, climbing directly to the room where he believed Daisy was. When he saw his daughter's face in the window, a wave of relief washed over him. "Daisy, my little one," he said in a low voice, trying to force the window open. "Daddy came to get you. Daddy, I knew you would come." Daisy tried to open the window from the inside, but it was locked. "I can't open it." "Step back from the window a little," Arthur instructed, using a tool to pry the lock. When the window finally opened, Daisy threw herself into her father's arms, crying with relief. "They said you didn't want me anymore. That's why you gave me to them." "That was never true, my daughter. It would never be true," Arthur said, hugging her tightly. "Mommy is here too. We're going home." While Arthur was reuniting with Daisy, Hope and Dr. Bennett had managed to access the office on the ground floor. To their surprise, they found Richard Driscoll waiting for them, sitting calmly behind his desk. "Hope Taylor," he said with a cold smile, "we finally meet in person." "Where is my daughter?" she demanded, ignoring the man's apparent calm. "Being reunited with her father as we speak, I imagine," Richard replied casually. "Did you really believe we didn't know you were coming tonight?" Dr. Bennett, leaning on his cane, watched nervously. "Richard, this has to stop. You can't keep destroying families." "Families?" Richard laughed. "Frank, you sold dozens of children to me over the years. Now you want to play the saint? I regret everything I did. But you turned it into something much worse. I gave these children opportunities they never would have had, education, resources, families who could properly care for them. Families that treated them like property," Hope exploded. "Families that bought human beings as if they were objects." At that moment, the office door opened and Maria Driscoll entered, followed by 2 guards. "The child has escaped," she announced coldly, "and there are other people on the property." Richard stood up, his calm facade finally cracking. "Find them all, now." But it was too late. Outside, Clements had triggered the contingency plan. Sirens were approaching on the road, not just reporters, but also authorities who had been contacted by lawyers she knew in Dallas. "You don't understand," Richard said desperately. "All I did was give these abandoned children a chance at a better life. Daisy was doomed to grow up in poverty, without education, without a future." "Our daughter was never abandoned," said Arthur, appearing at the office door with Daisy in his arms. "She always had a family that loved her." Daisy looked at Richard and Maria, then at her real parents. "Why did you lie to me?" she asked the Driscolls. "Why did you say my parents didn't want me?" The child's innocent question exposed the full cruelty of what they had tried to do. Maria looked away, unable to answer. "Because they're confused, my daughter," Hope explained gently. "Some adults make very bad choices and then make up excuses to feel better." When the authorities arrived, they found a scene that would change the course of several investigations. Dr. Bennett, in a final act of redemption, had managed to access Richard's safe and remove years of documentation on the child selling scheme. "It's all here," he said to the prosecutor who arrived with the team. "Names, dates, amounts, buying families, everything." He handed over a thick folder. "It's my final confession. Now I can die in peace." Richard Driscoll was arrested that same night, along with Maria and the guards who had participated in Daisy's kidnapping. The scheme that had operated for nearly a decade was finally being dismantled. 3 months later, in the yellow house that Arthur had bought on the outskirts of Stone Creek, far from the painful memories of the mansion, the family had finally found true peace. Dr. Bennett had lost his battle with cancer 2 weeks after the rescue, but not before seeing Richard Driscoll and dozens of accomplices indicted. Daisy, now 6, played in the garden with her favorite doll, singing the song Hope sang to her every night. The golden medallion shone in the sun around her neck, no longer a symbol of a painful past, but a reminder that true love always finds a way. "Mommy," she said, running to Hope, who was watering the flowers, "can I plant a tree for Grandpa Jed here in our garden?" "Of course, my daughter. What kind of tree do you want to plant?" "One that gives sweet fruit, so the little birds will always have food when they come to visit us." Hope hugged her daughter. Watching Arthur approach the house after a day's work at the new bakery he had opened in town, they had lost the family fortune, but they had gained something much more valuable, a real family built on love, honesty, and second chances. "Daisy," Arthur said, picking her up, "how was your day at school?" "I learned to write a new word today, family. And the teacher said family isn't just who you're born with, but who you choose to stick with." "Your teacher is very wise," Hope said, smiling. "And she's right," Daisy added, "because I chose you, and you chose me, and Grandpa Jed chose all of us when he taught me to be brave." That night, as she tucked Daisy into bed, Hope noticed a new drawing on the girl's desk. It showed a yellow house surrounded by fruit trees, with colorful birds flying around. In front of the house, 3 figures holding hands smiled at the sun shining high in the sky. "It's our real family," Daisy explained sleepily, "and the birds are all free and happy because they know they can always come home." Hope kissed her daughter's forehead, finally understanding that her journey of pain had ended where it always should have been, at home, with her family complete, building happy memories that would last forever. Outside, the stars shone over Stone Creek, witnesses to a family that had survived unimaginable storms and found in love the strength to start over, more united and happier than they ever imagined possible. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.